recent controversy at a school in Antigua and Barbuda, in which a 5-year-old girl with locks was reportedly refused entry to school as the term began, and her parents told that her locks would need to be cut to be in keeping with the school's rules. While every institution makes rules to govern the tidiness, cleanliness, and appearance of students, this controversy, when made news, sparked a debate over the rules and expectations that are attached to hair in our society, its appearance, its length, its texture, its styling, and prejudices that may be silently played out with those expectations. The incident that began this discussion surrounds, as I said, a 5-year-old girl whose mother arranged to send her to a private school, which happens also to be a Seventh-day Adventist school. The girl's mother, Jordan Mason, would later speak to Observer, claiming that on orientation day, the principal informed her that the child could not attend school with locks and that they'd have to be cut off. She claimed she wasn't aware that this was a rule, and further claimed that the child had previously been present among school staff in order to be registered in August, and it hadn't been mentioned. The story generated much debate, and in speaking to Observer, Mason openly called on the Ministry of Education to intervene. At its weekly meeting on Wednesday, this is Wednesday past, the cabinet reacted to the issue by putting out a statement saying that it condemned any discrimination of, quote, Rastafarians and those students who wear their natural hair in locks, end quote. It should be noted that the mother never identified herself or her daughter as Rastafarians. It is unclear if the government had been simultaneously, perhaps, reacting to maybe other reports that had come to it of other persons encountering resistance at school due to locks or other styling of their hair. The cabinet expressed a willingness to introduce statutes into law through Parliament that expressly prevented students from being barred from school on the basis of their hair. Shortly after, the Education Ministry issued a statement saying that it condemns all forms of discrimination. It noted the lawful power of schools to introduce rules to govern the tidiness, cleanliness, and deportment of their students. But it noted as well that Section 49(2)(b) of the Education Act of 2008 states that such rules shall not come into effect unless approved in writing by the Director of Education. It then stated a policy, or draft policy, on the issue of hair in schools, which said the following. Rules should not discriminate against students based on the natural texture, length, or color of their hair. Hair should be clean, free from foul odor and or contagions. It should be neat, well-groomed, and orderly presented. Hair should not pose a health and or safety risk to oneself or others, nor should it be a distraction to the general school population. Many have contextualized this issue as one of prejudice towards natural hairstyles, one of them being locks. Some would prefer to see it merely as a rule, an arbitrary rule that seeks to keep students looking tidy and groomed. Many have some difficulty in understanding issues of hair prejudice when it comes to black people enforcing rules for other black people. It is important to note that while this controversy surrounds a particular child at a particular school, there is a far broader issue to be discussed. All schools have rules about dress and grooming, both government and private schools, religious schools and non-religious schools alike. And many have long had rules about the presentation of hair, which today some might deem prejudiced in some way or another. Beyond schools, some employers as well have stipulations for hair grooming that are controversial in the workplace as well, and often do not look kindly upon locks, afros, and natural hair generally. Negative attitudes which West Indians have toward their hair, black West Indians that is part of the larger social consequence, historically, of the repressive social norms of colonial societies that existed across the region, where in previous centuries black persons were subjected to institutional racism, where being black was the basis upon which they were kept in enslavement, marginalized, deprived, and considered inferior in all respects, appearance, intelligence, and abilities. And despite leaving that society in the past and having built new societies premised on human dignity and human equality, there are many attitudes and values today which have their roots in the highly racist society of centuries past. These include the dislike that we tend to show for features that are in fact most natural to us: coily afro hair, fuller lips, broader noses, and dark skin. Natural black hair is often denigrated as nappy or untamed. Skin color prejudice amongst black West Indians is still very strong in many respects. For example, how many times have you heard someone use the deeply offensive phrase black and ugly? These types of prejudices have so long been a part of everyday life that it is sometimes hard to spot them, whether they're being meted out by persons or whether they're formed part of some institution's rules. Sometimes it's hard to spot them, sometimes it's hard to understand them for what they are, and sometimes it's difficult to call them out, and very much so, it's difficult to achieve change. But they affect us at school, they affect us at work, they affect us in our churches, they affect us in our communities, and so on. So on this segment, we ask what informs our values and preferences for how our hair should look at school, at work, and in general, and should those values change. And joining our panel for this discussion, we're happy to have with us this afternoon Mr. Foster Roberts. He joins us on Zoom. I'll ask him to unmute his microphone at this point so he can say hello. He's principal of the Otto's Comprehensive School and a veteran educator of many, many years. Happy to have you with us this afternoon, Mr. Roberts. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Mr. Murdoch, and good afternoon to the other members of the panel. Good afternoon to your listening and viewing audiences.
We have on the line with us Miss Joshua Annette Francis. She is a secondary school teacher here in Antigua and Barbuda. Happy to have her with us this afternoon. Good afternoon to you, Miss Francis. How are you doing?
Good afternoon to your listeners and everybody on the panel.
And finally, we have joining us as well on Zoom, Miss Jade Trim. She joins us from Trinidad and Tobago. She's a graduate student at the Institute of Gender Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Her thesis, in fact, is on the subject of black hair. We'll ask her to unmute her microphone so that she can say hello. Good afternoon to you, Miss Jade Trim. Tell us how you're doing this afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excellent right now, and thank you so much for having me today.
Mr. Foster Roberts, your general view of the controversy as it sort of has played out, and I did acknowledge that we're not solely speaking about one incident in one school. We're broadening the discussion to the issue of the sort of regulations and attitudes that are played out in school rules towards how they would expect students here to look. But your thoughts on what has played out within the last week?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Murdoch, for the question. I just want to say that I'm not in any position to judge the principal that made that decision, because every school in Antigua and Barbuda has their own policies for governance. And the Education Act itself is pretty much silent when it comes to the whole issue of hair. Actually, what it says on students accountable to teacher, principal, and ministry, section 18(1)(b), it says that every student shall be accountable to the principal for his or her general deportment at any time, that he or she is under the supervision of the school and members of the teaching staff, including time spent in traveling between the school and his or her other place of residence. Now, that is very broad. And so what schools would have done over the years is that most of schools would have put in place student manuals. So what are some of the things that are acceptable and what are not acceptable in the school? And if deportment, hairstyle or whatever, comes under the general deportment policy, I'm quite sure that most schools, if not all of us, when we have our orientation every year, that we share our student manual with the parents and the students, and they're encouraged to read them, and we also discuss with them what is within the manual. And if they have a problem at that particular time, then I'm sure that it is a good opportunity for them to hear their concern. And if it could be ironed out, it could be ironed out. If not, then so be it. But all of us operate on the rules. And I don't know of any institution, sir, not even the place where you work at Observer Day. They have rules for every worker that come into that place. And it's either you abide by the rules that are there, or if you don't like it, then you go someplace else. So basically for me, I am not in a position to judge for that principle, but just to know that in Antigua and Barbuda, all schools have rules governing the operations of school.
And let me bring in Miss Joshua Annette Francis, who we have on the line. Miss Francis, your general thoughts on the controversy as it has played out this week?
you did mention is definitely something that is not just for a school, but across the island. And it's something that as a teacher, we also debate at the gate every morning, because our rule says that the boys here should be well groomed, and individuals misinterpret what it means. So different textures and all of it comes down to personal judgment. And I can definitely agree with Pastor Robert saying that different institutions have different rules. However, I will also add that sometimes we have to adjust those rules. Years ago, slavery was right. Years ago, black people couldn't sit in a particular part of the bus. So although these rules are in place, we as a country must look beyond just now and be like, is it time for us to change these rules? And as a teacher who also has dreadlocks, it's definitely hitting home, because I go to work every day with my dreadlocks. I am not a Rastafarian. My parents aren't Rastafarian, but my hair is locked just because it is easier to manage and it's more cost effective, hence my hair being locked. And I would be offended if any given day the government gets up and decides that I can no longer wear my hair as it currently is to work. And it's something that we as a society, not just at that school, we have to have a debate, we have to discuss about. I would say that a few years ago in a professional development, Mr. Green, in one of his meetings, said, Princess Margaret, now the boys are allowed to wear their hair long, because it takes too much time to monitor the 1 inch and 1 length. You know what? Just come with your hair. Come with 2 plaits. Up, down. And I laugh. Up, down. Anyhow you want to come, just come with your 2 plaits. And I can see, years ago, you would not have been able to go to Princess Margaret with your as a boy, with your hair long. But now, he changed that culture because it was time to change. It was taking too much time to discipline something for the hair. And then then another question comes in. Does the length of a student's hair determine their ability to learn?
Well, let me pause you there and just bring in Miss Jade Trim to ask her for her thoughts. As I said to our audience, she joins us from Trinidad and Tobago, and the subject matter of attitudes towards black hair is something that at a research level she's been quite involved in. Your thoughts on the controversy as it played out this week, Miss Trim?
Okay, so I agree very much with our previous panelists. I feel that a lot of the times it's easy to dismiss something as a rule or something that has been institutionalized for a particular period of time. But a lot of the times there's an underlying ideology behind certain policies and certain rules, particularly when it comes to grooming. And I mean, in the region, historically, a lot of these rules have been very anti-black. Particularly when it comes to around hair and ways of dressing and those sorts of things. And so I feel like when I heard about this issue, I was quite upset actually, because I feel like we should be, as a region, to the point where these things are no longer occurring, as mostly independent nations, as places that are mainly black and brown. It's always interesting to me how these policies can attack what is essentially black embodiment. Natural hair is a part of black embodiment.
Well, I'll just state at this point that it's an issue that has received greater and greater attention throughout the Caribbean, and it has played out quite often in schools. Just before I come back to Mr. Foster Roberts, I'll just mention for the audience's benefit very quickly, you could find articles online with this particular controversy as to what rules are applied to students in school as regards their hair. Has been an issue in Jamaica, has been an issue in Guyana, has been an issue in Belize. In fact, there was actually a court case in Belize that had to do with students and their hair recently. And I'm not even so particularly sure it actually had to do with black students, but it again had to do with whatever standards were applied to students and their hair. It's been an issue in Guyana, in St. Lucia. So Antigua and Barbuda is by far not alone. It's a broader issue within the West Indies and outside to every part of the Americas where you will find black people. Coming back to you, Mr. Foster Roberts, is there anything you want to respond to at this point? Or shall I ask a fresh question?
No, I just want to say that the whole issue of school policies or rules are usually borne out for the most part, and we have to be very mindful of this aspect, for the most part, on the issue of safety for our children. I have been in school, I've been working in school now for what, 38 years? And we do have fights in schools. I am quite sure that when you were at grammar school, you had boys that were fighting and pulling at one another, at whatever it is that they get to hold on to. You can imagine that somebody comes into the school with extensions in their hair. I'm not talking about being Rastafarian now. I'm talking about extensions in your hair. And you get in a fight. And that is the first thing that I can hold on to as the person that you're involved in the fight with, and cause further damage to you than if you had the hair whether shorter or prepared in such a way that it did not lend itself to anybody grabbing it and pulling it. So we have to be very mindful of the reasons why some schools or most schools put certain policies in place.
Well, I mean,
for the most part, it is for the security of the child.
But there are many persons, I myself, who would contest that. For instance, we have had rules that, for instance, if we talk about males, for example, address the length of male hair. In a country like Antigua and Barbuda, where the majority of the population is black and the majority of students in public schools especially will be black. And we have often had rules, some schools have changed them, but we've often had rules that tend to necessitate that male hair be cut very, very short. And I would hardly think that going back, if we go back 3 decades, that the reasons, the thinking behind those rules at the time and the thinking behind those rules consistently has always been, the safety of children if they should ever get into a fight. I think we can acknowledge that there is a social attitude towards how we would like to see people groomed. The social attitude being that with black males, you tend to want to see a low haircut. And with females, I know that prefer to see the hair as opposed to an issue of, safety if you happen to get into a fight.
Mr. Murder, look, we are cherry picking at minors. Schools have bigger issues than here. Way bigger issues than whether a person comes with long hair, short hair, nappy hair, cool, we have bigger issues. Just the other day, we were at school there, and everybody was burning up inside of the classroom. Nobody talk about them kind of issues there, where our children are being affected. Everybody, not just some now. Everybody, including the teachers, are affected. We have bigger issues than here thing to be dealing with in schools. Look at our CXC results the other day. Why is it that our students are not performing in schools? Is it just because somebody's saying that, oh, you should not wear your hair long? It can't be just that. So there are greater issues to be contended about, for us to contend, than just to be talking about this one issue. It is an issue, yes, but does it really stop a child from learning? There are greater issues that prevent learning than just here.
Well, let me ask.
For me, we just seem to be majoring in minors.
But let me ask though.
And as a society, Mr. Murder, we just need to stop cherry picking on issues that we believe are important to us and look at the greater picture.
But let me ask.
The greater picture is the education of our children, and how is it?
Let me ask.
That we're going to get to that point.
Hold on.
Where our children can be properly educated without just cherry picking on something because it fits me now.
Well,
the other day.
Hold on a moment, because there are many people who take an issue with different hair policies, and they would agree with you. They would agree with you wholeheartedly when you say that there are greater issues in education that ought to be dealt with, and that something like hair is just, if you want to wear your hair long, if you want to wear your hair in locks, if you want to braid your hair, who cares? That it affects the education system in no way. So come how you want to have your hair come, so long as it's clean and so on and so forth. And we will deal with the major issues of how we educate you. Is that not something you could sympathize with?
I can't say that it does not affect, because look, some of us have been out of the classroom for a very long time, but some of the matters that we had in school 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they still happen. They still happen for today, because the system itself is the same system. It hasn't changed. So then why is it that we're talking about this issue? Maybe we should be talking about getting the whole education system review. The Education Act speaks about having a review committee to review the education system every 5 years. Nobody know about these things. So then if you review it every 5 years, then maybe this is one of the matters that will come up. And then we have a general discussion about it in nationally. And then we come up with something that is feasible for all of us in our society.
Well, I don't think anybody would disagree with you there in terms of, that periodic review. Let me bring in Miss Joshua Ned Francis. Miss Joshua Ned Francis, if there's anything you want to add at this point, feel free. I'm wondering about your thoughts, Miss Francis, if we leave the issue of schools now, because we did want to broaden this conversation. We leave the issue of schools and we just look at society generally and how natural hair tends to be viewed in society. I wonder what your thoughts and your experiences are.
I will definitely agree with Pastor Roberts that there are greater issues for us to speak about other than here. And this is why my best example when I speak at my staff in any forum, I will give the example of Colin Green. He felt like the hair issue was taking too much of his time. He had other things to deal with. So you know what he said? Let the boys go in here. That means we don't have to deal with that. And now we need to take a page from his book and take it island-wide. So the policy needs to be changed, not just at Princess Margaret, but at all schools. Are we going to waste time in the mornings disciplining students because of their hair? And I'm going to jump on that bandwagon because the classrooms are hot. There has currently been a poll on Facebook where they're going through all the different schools and to how much funds that they need. And I was one of the teachers who commented. I'm like, there are 48 buildings in our school. There are 48 rooms in our school. So that means we need at least 3 fans per room. And I didn't even know a parent saw that. And they brought 3 fans for the room that their child was in. So there are bigger issues for us to discuss. But this discussion is necessary because we need to have these little discussions, get them out of the way, and then have the bigger discussions. Because we're looking at, I teach at the All Saints Secondary School, and when we're doing the calculation, it would cost us $16,000 to get fans in all of our classrooms. And then we're here saying, who's going to pay for these fans? But then the big issue is, when we pay for these fans, they get put at night. But we're supposed to have security guards. I teach at All Saints Secondary School, and I'm very upset that the thieves went in and they stole my bag of chocolate from my Yellow House students. And they steal laptops, they steal all kind of stuff, and they are big issues for us to talk about. However, we cannot ever think that we don't have to talk about the small issues. And I will agree that with natural hair, we frown on it. When a child comes to here with a fro, I've seen teachers look at these children funny. The girls now have a twist out, and their teachers were said to these students, you can't wear your hair as a twist out anymore because they're saying it's distracting. And I will definitely shout out, there's this lawyer. We went to State College together. She's now on her achieving journey. Jen, her Instagram name is Jen Scott. I don't know her right name, but she has natural hair, and it's a big fro. And when I see it, I feel good that she's empowering that I am an attorney and I don't need to have straight hair. But do other people see that? No, we frown on natural hair. We frown on boys when their hair are grown long. We frown on men who are Rastafarians. And nothing tall makes me feel better when I see there are few people, I think Zachary Roberts is one, when they have locks and their hair being lawyers. I love it. But these people are changing the culture that we grew up years in. And the reality is the culture that we grew up in is natural hair is seen as bad hair. And we're taking that into the schools now. And this is why it's not a big issue, but it is an issue that we must discuss.
Ms. Jade Trim, anything you want to jump in on at this point? And to the issue of generally how society tends to view black hair and the styling of black hair generally. What's been your experience in Trinidad and Tobago?
I will say my experience has been Essentially the same. There's very little difference in terms of how Trinidadians look at natural hair. I would say we have a newer generation of young women and men who are transitioning to natural hair, and there is that, but there's still very much in our policies, um, in our, especially in the workplace, and in schools, there's still very much that stigma against natural hair and against particular textures of natural hair, which of course is a different debate as well. I agree, that there are other issues that schools face currently, but I think that the way that we look at this issue of hair in schools is also important, because what we're really talking about is not just policies, that may restrict how hair can be worn, but when students wear their hair in such a way that it goes against these policies, we're actually talking about students being pulled away from classes, being kept away from schools, and that is a loss of time for education. That is a disruption of a classroom. I've also had that experience. When I was in secondary school, there was a student who wore her hair in what we call a high puff. Um, and it was not in the least way against the school rules, but it was seen as a distracting hairstyle by our principal at the time. And it became such an issue that they interrupted our class and for like about, I think, 30 to 40 minutes to have her change her hairstyle on the spot. And I think when we think about it like that, that's 30 to 40 minutes of classroom time simply for a hairstyle that no one in the classroom at the time, other than the principal, found to be distracting. So I think that is also something that we should consider.
Mr. Foster Roberts, again, feel free to respond to anything, but I'm particularly, I want to come back at what you said when, obviously you mentioned the greater issues in education to be dealt with, and I think that's absolutely correct. Nobody really could make any argument that's off. But I do like what Ms. Francis said, where even what we might consider to be the smaller issues are worth discussing. And, there are a lot of students who go to school, and I think the way that one keeps their hair is part of their individualism, is part of their individuality, the way they express themselves. Many people frown at the fact that for boys, and in some respects for girls, the way that they would want to keep their hair in a natural style, whether they want to have locks, whether they want to have whether they want to have plaits, whether they want to have a small fro, that even if it's clean and even if it's neat and even if it's well kept, that their institution should frown upon them for doing that. Do you see that as a concern? Could you sympathize with that concern that the way that you keep your hair is part of how you decide how you want to present yourself to the world, and that we perhaps ought not to take that away from our young people, especially when you're going to school and everybody is in a uniform, sort of bringing in a sort of uniformity and conformity to everyone. That there's some small ways in which persons could express themselves, how they choose to wear their hair. Do you sympathize with that at all?
Look, whereas I could say yes to that, Mr. Murdoch. There's also, for me, the issue is the responsibility that the principal has, because the principal's responsibility is not that of the teacher. It's greater than that of the teacher, because the principal has to look about the safety and security of all students and the teachers on the campus. Yeah. I don't have any problem with a child wanting to express him or herself wearing their hair, but it has to be done in conformity with what, as far as I'm concerned, because like I said, that the act is pretty silent. So it is left up to the principal to determine what he or she would consider as proper deportment. Deportment.
But that's the thing.
Listen here, Mr. Murdoch.
Isn't it possible that principals would bring perhaps their own values and to some extent their own prejudices into that assessment?
There may be instances of those, sir, but where you discuss your policies with the parents and you get the parents buy into it, and then when you would have done that, well, even before you get to the parents, you discuss the matter with your staff. You get your staff buy into it. You get the parents buy into it. And then finally you get the Ministry of Education buying into it. And once you have all of those parties agreeing to the policy, sir, then it's just for everybody to come and conform to whatever it is that was agreed upon. If it is to change, it has to go back to that same channel, or the law has to change. And when the law changes, then it's supposed to make it clear as to what is acceptable or what is not acceptable, so it is not left up to the whims and fancy of any one or two individuals. I want to show you an example of something why in my school, I asked my female students not to wear their hair in, I would think they call it a bonnet, with the big stuff in the middle of the hair like a puff. You know why I did that, sir? Because at the gate, I was searching the boys for contrabands. I was searching the boys for illegal substances. And the boys found a way to beat the system, to have the girls come through the gate with it in their hair, with the same puff thing in their hair. So in order for me to counter that, I just simply said, hey, don't wear your hair like that. If you're going to do so, then you can, and they showed me another way in which it could be done and work nicely, so it does not present that kind of a challenge for me. So here it is that I was working, they were working with me and I was working with them to help alleviate a security problem that I was having on the campus. So we can't just always say, for me,
do as you like,
for me and my child, because it can't just be for you and your child. It's for your child and the 710 students in the school. If you understand the point I'm making.
Yes, very much so, very much so. And there have been many persons who have expressed the view that parents ought to accustom themselves or make themselves aware of what the rules are at a particular institution. And if the rules are not in keeping with your own values, well, you could choose another institution. A lot of people have said that. Of course, the flip side of that is that a lot of people will say, well, broadly, we need to have some standard in society where we perhaps acknowledge the sort of very subtle ways over the years, forever, that we have.
But Mr. Murder, that's another thing, I find that in this country here, I just find that some of us are so hypocritical, because it is okay at one point in time when I was on the other end, but now that I am on this end receiving, it is not okay. Hypocrites. So we as a people need to really sit down and examine ourselves to see where it is we want this Antigua and Barbuda to go. Because if every day that we're going to come and cherry pick up something that does not suit me today, but it suited me 2 weeks ago, it suited me a month ago, but today I am the shoes is on my foot now, so it is squeezing me, and so I'm going to react now. We can't continue like that.
Well, what do you mean like that? You mean as if like parents favoring those rules maybe when they were in school?
Parents probably favor them when they're in school. They favored it when it wasn't their child, but now it is their child. They have a problem.
Well, let me bring back in Ms. Joshua.
So we have to be really mindful, sir. I look, everybody has their views, but for me, as a principal of an institution, I have to make sure that every child that comes to the school, one, gets a very good education, and two, that when the parents send them to school, that they are safe.
Well, let me ask you one question I should ask you before we move on and go to our final round of questions. One thing I should get from you is, what has been your experience or observation when it comes to black natural hair and prejudice? Not necessarily in school, just generally in society over the decades. Have you noticed that prejudice that people talk of when persons, or they don't like to see hair like this, it look nappy? I mean, I've actually in my lifetime I've been told by persons that my head looks niggerish. Actually,
again, Mr. Murdoch, I've seen your hair. I have a problem with you. As a matter of fact, I like how you carry it, because you're a big man. Listen here, sir. As I said, that as a society, we just continue chirping, because we're talking about our Africanness, yes? I decided I'm going to a four-star hotel to get some fine dining. And in the fine dining, they have knife and fork and spoon. And I sitting down there eating knife and fork and spoon. Where we got that from? the same English system, the colonial masters, and I'll sit down and I'll eat with that. But then they start to talk about here. If you really want to talk about your true Africanness, you have to seriously consider every single thing about Africanness. It can't just be one. It has to be every single thing. That is my contention.
Let me jump back over to Ms. Joshua.
So we can't keep cherry picking on the issues.
We
can't stop. We can't cherry picking on the issues, sir.
Ms. Joshua Net
when it favors us.
Ms. Joshua Net Francis, what would you want to add at this point? We have about 3 minutes left for this segment, so I want to give everybody an opportunity
I will agree to disagree with Mr. Roberts in the context of cherry picking. The only way society can go forward is if we start to change small issues and small things. We as a society, we can't change everything at once. Rosa Parks, she changed the way, the place you could sit at a bus. That was one issue. But there were bigger issues. Then there was the issue with clubs, and then there was the issue with schools. We as a society, and at this moment, this radio program, we are trying to change the culture and the norms surrounding here. And then next week, we will jump on fans. And then the week after that, we will jump on CXC results. As a society, we have to take issues in small steps. Because the day we try to conquer it all, the education system, and probably one of the reasons why the education system is failing in so many areas, is because we don't want to take baby steps. We want to take leaps. We want to jump. And according to somebody, some of us want to teleport. We as a society, and I'm saying we because it also includes me, it includes every principal, it includes every teacher, it includes the Ministry of Education. We have to start looking at the Education Act, looking at all things that happens in the education system, and we need to adjust them one by one. And eventually, after adjusting things one by one, we will get to a better place where we have better CXC results, where we have better humans, where we have a better society overall. And we're not going to get a better society if we try to change the big things or if we try to change too much. We have to start with changing one thing at a time. Or people don't say, little, full basket, throwing one at a time.
And final word to you, Miss Jade Trim. What would you want to leave us with? Anything you want to react to?
I would like to agree with that sentiment. I do feel like we need to take small steps. Everything that has ever happened within this region in terms of revolutionary acts or anything related to decolonization did not happen overnight. It is a very long process. It took a number of years and it's going to continue that way. And I feel like, maybe sometimes something could seem so minuscule to one person, but it can resonate very differently with others. And, I feel as we talk about kids, there's always something that, apologies, I lost my train of thought. But I would just like to say, we need to continue this conversation. I know it's happening other places around the region, it's happening around the world, and it's a very necessary conversation that has to be had, not simply in the education system, but also in the workplace and society as a large. So thanks very much for having me today.
And with that, we can end this segment here. I want to say thank you to all three of our guests this afternoon. We were joined, of course, by the last voice you heard there was Ms. Jade Trim. She's a graduate student at the Institute of Gender and Development Studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, and her thesis is on the subject of black hair. We were joined as well by secondary school teacher Miss Joshua Net Francis. She's a secondary school teacher here in Antigua and Barbuda, the All Saints Secondary, if I'm not incorrect. And also Mr. Foster Roberts joined us as well, principal at the Otto's Comprehensive School, an educator of many decades. We thank all three of you for joining us this afternoon for what was quite a riveting discussion.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody.
If you'd like